Nimitz-class carriers, the most dominant ships ever created. Combining a highly trained crew with the latest in military technology. They are prepared for combat at a moment's notice.
On the flight deck, stand by the recovery aircraft. Salute. Port lights, commands cross. 113 is airborne. Can you give me the status of the man aloft?
A carrier is a billion components operated by 5,000 men and women with one mission: to launch airplanes into combat. Far out in the Persian Gulf, the carrier USS George Washington is deploying for 6 months. All day long, her flight deck is busy with warplanes taking off and landing. A vivid display of collaboration as the men and women of her crew keep the ship's aviators airborne. Nimitz-class carriers like George Washington maintain air wings of more than 70 planes, able to strike targets hundreds of miles away.
You can look around this flight deck and you can see aircraft that are being prepared to go over Iraq, because we're doing it every day and every night. Forward deployed presence, taking off and landing on an aircraft carrier. That's why we're here.
Our aircraft are operating over Iraq on call at a moment's notice to those soldiers and Marines on the beach who might need the close air support that's provided by those aircraft.
George Washington is a mobile fortress. Her magazines hold more than 2,000 tons of bombs, missiles, and other ordnance. Ready for use by an air wing that can launch planes every 45 seconds. The U.S. Navy deploys 9 Nimitz-class carriers. A 10th is under construction. Each has a 5,000-member crew. These warships can cruise at more than 33 knots, transporting their firepower anywhere on the planet in days. In a combat zone like the Persian Gulf, a carrier battle group can tip the balance of conflict.
When something happens in the world, the first question always is, well, where are the carriers? Our whole reason for being in existence is to be able to go anywhere in the world and launch these airplanes so that they can do our nation's bidding.
For these fighting ships to function at peak performance, their crews must train relentlessly.
We try to train like we would fight. When we do cyclic operations, we kind of try to do things like we would in a normal combat evolution. So we're always training like we'll fight.
Aboard George Washington, that training began months ago at her home port on the Virginia coast. At Naval Station Norfolk, sailors new to GW stand guard. The crew is preparing for one of its regular exercises in combat readiness. In port, a carrier has no aircraft. Her pilots use airfields inland. This leaves the ship vulnerable, so security on board tightens.
My security guys are stationed throughout the ship so that we can protect the ship in case of any kind of, like, say, swimmer attack or even small boat attack. You know, since the USS Cole incident occurred, we've really stepped up on those force protection. My guys stand around with their M16s and their 240s or M60s so that we can protect just about every inch of the ship.
As long as vessels have been putting to sea, sailors have known what it means to learn the ropes. And even in the 21st century, That includes casting off from the dock. Tugboats nudge GW through the busy harbor. Norfolk's crowded waters and narrow tolerances keep all hands alert. Over several months, the ship leaves port repeatedly to undergo a series of tests. Every crew member, pilot, and system must qualify as combat ready. Once a departing carrier reaches the open ocean, her crew clears the ship's air wing to touchdown. One by one, aviators land their multi-million-dollar craft. Aboard carriers like George Washington, the typical air wing comprises 2 squadrons of F-14 Tomcat fighters and 2 squadrons of FA-18 Hornet fighter bombers. Fuel and supplies are shuttled by C-2 Greyhounds. Command and control craft called E-2 Hawkeyes will guide pilots on their missions. A squadron of S-3B Vikings defends against submarine attack. EA-6B Prowlers handle electronic surveillance and jam enemy radar. 8 H-60 Seahawk helicopters ferry supplies and mail. In combat and foul weather, the Seahawks provide search and rescue coverage. Air wings securely on board, the $4.5 billion carrier steers for deeper waters. Nimitz-class carriers are more than 20 stories tall and longer than 3 football fields, the largest warships ever. Nearly 40 feet of these vessels are below surface, displacing more than 98,000 tons of water. Their 2 nuclear reactors generate 280,000 horsepower and only need to refuel every 20 to 25 years. These immense vessels are double-bottomed to guard against torpedoes and mines. Their 18 lower decks hold sleeping berths, corridors, situation rooms, and galleys, the day-to-day settings where sailors work, eat, and sleep. The largest single space is the flight deck, 1,092 feet long and 251 feet wide. These 4.5-acre seaborne airfields are divided into sections fore and aft. Planes land on the aft section, angled at 9.5 degrees, so that if a pilot bolters or fails to touch down safely, he can power back into the air. With warplanes constantly landing, taking off, and moving about, a carrier flight deck is a supremely dangerous workplace.
On the flight deck, we have very harsh conditions. Some people like to say that it's one of the most dangerous streets in the world because of everything that's going on. You really have to have your head on your shoulders and be thinking about everything that's going on around you.
What's going on is a deafening hurricane of noise generated by whirling propellers, jet engines, and sudden gusts that can send an unwary sailor into the sea. Amid these perils, the only real protection is knowing your job, no matter what it is.
There's a lot of different colors of jerseys that you see on the flight deck, and the jersey that I'm wearing is yellow. That represents aircraft directors. They're the ones moving the aircraft around on the deck. There's also some blue shirts behind me. Those are plane handlers. They chalk and chain the aircraft. Also, they're tractor drivers or elevator operators. There's also green shirts. They're the technicians that operate the catapult and arresting gear that launch and recover the aircraft. There's also some red shirts behind me. Those are the crash and salvage personnel. And also purple shirts. And those purple shirts are what we call grapes, and they are the refuelers. They refuel and defuel all the aircraft.
During combat, red shirts handle bombs and other ordnance. White shirts mean safety officers, responsible for crew members' well-being and equipment safety. Among the most dangerous spots on the flight deck are the areas around the catapults. Nicknamed Cats, a Nimitz-class carrier's 4 catapults are on the bow and at the ship's waist or midsection. Each can rocket a plane from a standing start to 170 miles per hour in 3 seconds. Any mishap could wreak havoc, so Cat crews constantly test the system.
This catapult here, we had in a down status last night for maintenance, fixing to shoot no loads. No load is a catapult shot without an aircraft. We run the shots to make sure we have no steam leaks, everything's good to go, because we don't want to take any chances with the pilot or the aircraft.
The business end of the catapult is called a shuttle.
We have 2 steam pistons underneath this cat track. We have 450 psi of steam that builds up downstairs. When you press the fire button, our launch valves open, putting all the steam pressure behind the pistons, forcing the shuttle forward.
But shuttles alone can't get jets aloft. Warplanes need more wind under their wings than catapults provide. An aircraft carrier launches planes by combining catapult power with lift created by turning into the wind. Nimitz-class carriers are fast enough to hurl jets airborne in a dead calm. These vessels use their speed to develop artificial headwinds of more than 20 knots. On George Washington's bridge, Captain Erdesy and team focus on keeping the ship's direction and speed steady.
You see state-of-the-art digital displays, touch panel displays. You see displays that provide the conning officer, the person who's actually giving the orders on where to put the rudders and how to set the engines. In an instant, he can look and determine where his rudders are, how his engines are set, what course the ship is steering, how fast the ship is turning.
To turn a carrier, it takes a huge mechanism managed by machinist mate Senior Chief Paul Rodloff.
Right now we're in what's known as the steering ram room. What we have is what's called a double Rapson slide. We have 2 steering rams. Take hydraulic pressure. We'll put hydraulic pressure on the opposite ends of each ram. That'll cause linear movement of the rams. Attached to the rams is what's known as a cross member. We have a crosshead block. If this ram moves in either direction, it'll cause this cross member to rotate. Attached to the cross member in the center is the rudder post, which extends out the bottom of the ship. So we take the linear motion of the rams, causes the cross member to move, that's transferred to rotational motion, turning the rudder outside the ship.
A Nimitz-class carrier's twin rudders are enormous, 30 feet high and 22 feet wide. Each weighs 50 tons. Crew members can use either to steer the ship, even if they lose their direct link with the bridge.
The bridge loses control of the rudder, they sound an alarm. Right here, this is known as a trick wheel. What we do is we have a series of switches back here that will electrically disconnect the bridge from the steering system. We'll engage this steering wheel and to drive the ship right from here.
Deep in each carrier, from midship to stern, run massive shafts connecting her engine turbines to her propellers. To channel that power, the shafts pass through a series of reinforced chambers called alleys. On GW, Lieutenant Commander Tom Moninger oversees this alley.
Where we are right now is in 2 Bravo shaft alley toward the stern of the ship. The purpose of this shaft alley is to hold the weight of the shaft and allow us to turn the screw through the water. The nice thing about the aircraft carrier is the redundancy built in. We've got 4 shafts and can operate planes successfully on one of them if we need to.
The carrier's enormous power helps aviators land. To touch down, pilots count on their carriers being in a particular spot at a particular speed. Otherwise, they'd never be able to drop a 25-ton airplane onto a flight deck at 200 miles an hour and stop in 300 feet. Pilots rely on teams of landing signal officers, or LSOs, to guide jets onto the deck. LSOs know exactly what it means to land at sea. They're aviators themselves. FA-18 pilot Lieutenant Commander Christine Acton directs the LSO platform at the stern.
Pressure on the LSO platform, this is basically how this works. We've got other airplanes in the air, they come around and we land them on what we call a glide slope.
Glide slope is the downward angle a pilot must follow to land on a moving carrier deck.
The LSO is watching aircraft state, the deck statuses, the aircraft carrier, as well as what the energy state is of the airplane. The LSO can see that before the pilot's going to see that, before the airplane's going to react.
If a pilot isn't on glide slope, or there's trouble on the flight deck, LSOs trigger wave-off lights that signal the aviator to abort the landing. LSOs do their part. But in the end, a pilot traveling nearly 200 miles per hour must have the skill and savvy to snag his plane's tailhook onto a steel cable only 2 inches thick.
Right here is the number 2 wire. We have 4 arresting gear wires on board. And actually you're seeing there's 2 parts to each wire. We have a cross-deck pendant and what's called a purchase cable, which feeds down into the deck. There's an amazing amount of force being caught by these wires each time an aircraft lands.
But there's more to the arresting gear than cables. They lead down to rooms like this, where bosun's mate Steve Tate operates one of 4 massive machines that have to stop a plane cold in 3 seconds.
Basically, the aircraft lands, engages the cable, and pulls a fixed set of pulleys in, and it pushes this ram into this cylinder right here, and it forces all the fluid out this cylinder and out this piping right here at 10,000 psi. It flows up through here, and this is the constant runout valve. This is the heart of the arresting gear engine. This is essentially right here is what stops the aircraft. 308 gallons goes from here all the way up through here and around to this accumulator in 3 seconds.
After a cable stretches for a catch, crew members guide it as it retracts into place. The crew needs only 45 seconds to prepare the arresting gear for the next in a line of incoming planes. Once airplanes land on a carrier flight deck, they come under the supervision of Flight Control Center, located just inside the tower.
We could put about 3 F-14s here, 2 F-14s here, an F-18 here.
It may look like child's play, but for Lieutenant Commander Michael Singleton, this exercise is deadly serious. He's the aircraft handling officer, or handler.
It gets the most stressful when equipment goes down, catapults or the arresting gear goes down. Some aircraft has landed with an emergency or something like that, and those do happen quite often.
Manipulating scale models, the handler recreates the flight deck on an outline crew members call the Ouija board. The handler has to think in 3 dimensions as he juggles the locations of jets, tractors, and crew members.
On the flight deck, stand well clear. Lowering aircraft elevator 3 to the hangar bay. Stand well clear. Lower all 3. Lower all 3. Clear. 4 stand clear to stand by to recover aircraft.
With so much taking place in so many directions, crews work hard to be ready for anything. They constantly hone their emergency skills.
On a boat deck, stand by, we're recovering red. Helmets on, chin straps down, stand by your line. Everybody stand by, we're going.
The boat deck rescue crew drills often and hard.
This is a carrier. We have a lot of people working in a flight deck. We got aircraft in the air. God forbid something happens. Either people get blown overboard or you have aircraft in the water.
That what makes it, our job here on the boat deck is very important, because we're the ones who are going to go and pick them up.
When something does go wrong, the results can be devastating. In just seconds, airplanes can be lost and lives irrevocably changed. What you've just witnessed is a rare occurrence, but unforgettable for those who survive it. As this single-seat FA-18 Hornet traps, the arresting cable stretches to the breaking point. When it breaks, the jet quickly disappears over the side and into the water. Training saves the pilot, who ejects immediately. This yellow shirt miraculously jumps the cable as it whips under him, not once, but twice. Other well-trained crew members are not so lucky. As the cable snaps back, it takes out everything in its path. 7 crew members are seriously injured. 3 in critical condition are immediately evacuated by helicopter. Few aboard will ever forget this grim episode. No matter how resolute sailors focus during training, that focus intensifies when a carrier enters a war zone where the stakes are even higher. Manama, Bahrain is a commercial port on the Persian Gulf and base of the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet. 5th Fleet forces are supporting American troops on the ground in Iraq. At all times, the lineup includes a Nimitz-class carrier. After a fast crossing of the Atlantic and Mediterranean, the USS George Washington has reached the Gulf with her carrier strike group to join a larger force already in place.
The George Washington Carrier Strike Group left Norfolk and left with a certain number of ships, aircraft, and people. When we show up over here, we then become part of the theater commander's menu, so to speak, that he can push around the theater as he sees the need. We can pull them all together and operate as a carrier strike group. That's how we train, that's how we worked up. Or we can put those pieces where they're most needed.
327 F1 goes to Marshall.
GW has sailed into harm's way. With the U.S. fighting in Iraq, the Persian Gulf is part of a war zone. This ordnance is live, and the carrier's pilots are about to put it to work. Down below, crew members prepare weapons in one of GW's 44 magazines. These specialists have spent a year learning to work with explosive devices, like these 1,000-pound bombs. Teams use hand tools to avoid stripping threads that would keep them from diffusing unused ordnance carried back from a bombing run. Down here, a bomb only gets one of its fuse elements. Final triggering devices go into place at planeside. These weapons travel between magazines and flight deck in 2 different elevators, reserved for ordnance. Should fire or explosions occur on deck, this system keeps flames from reaching the magazines. On the flight deck, ordnance specialists join an air wing support crew to arm a plane. They work quickly, but with absolute concentration. There is no margin for slackness. No one wants a bomb coming loose in the middle of a launch. Once specialists install the final triggering mechanisms, the pilot can take off. Towering 80 feet above the flight deck of a Nimitz-class carrier stands the Island. This superstructure mounts dishes of avionics systems that scan for planes, missiles, and surface craft, friendly or hostile. Beneath the radar arrays, crews and gear fill 3 control rooms. On the flag bridge, the admiral and staff coordinate the battle group. Above on the main bridge, the carrier's captain and his command crew control the ship. The topmost bridge, primary flight control, is where the air boss works.
On the flight deck, stand clear of the port catwalk, stand clear of the bow line, stand by the recovery aircraft. Paddles, lenses on, you have control.
This area up here we call tower or primary flight control. And the mini boss, Commander Dave Fox, and myself, Commander John Sheehan, our job is to ensure the safe launch and recovery of the aircraft.
305.
The mini boss is in charge of the forward part of the ship, so launching off the bow. And my main responsibility is the aft part of the ship, catching them and then launching off the waist. But both of us sort of back each other up, keep our scan going, looking for anything that's abnormal. In about an hour, we'll launch our next cycle and then catch our next cycle. But we're sending aircraft over the beach with precision-guided bombs. They're talking to our troops on the ground there. So each hour and a half, we'll launch a new cycle and catch the next cycle.
As pilots prepare to take off, flight directors or shooters adjust the carrier's catapults, custom tailoring each launch. A few feet from the plane's path, an armored bubble shields Lieutenant Commander Stephen Schmidt.
Attention, good scope, good on continental winds across. Combat. Salute. 450, we're clear forward, legs, winds cross, thumbs. Watch track, fire. I'm Lieutenant Commander Stephen Schmidt. I'm one of the shooters here on the ship. We're the last check in all the safety concerns of getting the aircraft in the air. Everything from whether the aircraft is safe for flight to the catapult being safe to launch them. We had 4 qualified catapult and arresting gear officers on board. We rotate through the positions so we stay sharp.
Another shooter, Lieutenant Commander Dave Larson, works the flight deck.
My ultimate job is the safety and responsibility of launching and recovering all 15 aircraft. Must stop here. Okay? If we have a mishap, and it's a safety-related mishap, that's my fault.
Pilots depend on shooters, and shooters depend on the flight crew.
And what he's doing here is bringing me the weight of the aircraft. It's in thousands of pounds. The heavier the aircraft, the more power I have to give them from the catapult. And I control that setting right here with my capacity selector valve setting. I go to the tables for that, and it gives me a predetermined opening rate of that launch valve, and that's how much steam goes through the launching cylinders for the catapult. Now they're double checking me below decks to make sure I'm using my charts correctly. It's a system where if I screw it up, they'll catch it below, and it doesn't happen. And I like to take pride in what I'm doing here, and I get it right the first time, but just in case, they're checking me below decks. Passing him the expected end speed so the pilot knows what to expect when he comes off the end of the cat.
What I'm looking for when I'm ready to shoot, I'll make sure the bow's clear. I'll give him the hook sign. The guy will hook it. This guy's going to go. He'll take tension. He'll get to me. I'll turn him up. When he gives me a salute, I'll go. Check my bow safety, make sure we're clear. Check it, 2 hands up, half second, thumbs up, and then it's good. He'll fly.
Amid this deadly bustle, shooters on deck and in the bubble must stay on constant alert.
It's a stressful environment by nature, but it's a managed stress. So we get them in there pretty quickly when we have all 4 cats going. I can usually get them about 20 to 30 seconds apart that way.
Shooters must calculate precisely.
Thumbs, head steady, clear track.
Too much power, and the catapult could rip off a plane's landing gear. Too little, and a cold shock could send the plane plummeting into the sea, perhaps dooming its crew.
Wings out, thumb up, Bill.
To assure that shooters understand all aspects of takeoff, only aviators hold this job.
Thumbs, head still steady. See ya.
A pilot may spend an entire tour as a shooter.
Good shot.
Landing and takeoff are tough on airframes, engines, and other critical parts. Maintenance is essential. Air wing crews often make repairs on the spot. Serious problems go into the main hangar. The 4 aircraft elevators can haul 50 tons of warplane to or from the hangar deck in 8 seconds. A cavernous 25 feet high, the main hangar is nearly 700 feet long and more than 100 feet wide. It's a warehouse for the tools of war, and when those tools break down, it's a repair shop. Green-shirted crews handle the work on planes parked wing to wing. George Washington's mechanics can handle 95% of warplane repairs on board. Their spare parts inventory is right at hand. The aft portion of the hangar is reserved for jet engine repair, performed by the Aircraft Intermediate Maintenance Division, or AIMD.
Right now we're back here in the jet shop where I've got about 40 people that do work on the various engines that we have the capability to repair. For the most part, the squadrons can only do on-aircraft work on the engines. Anything that goes beyond their capability on the aircraft, the engine's got to be pulled out and then it's brought back here for that type of work.
In a war zone, maintenance crews work around the clock. A carrier is essentially a medium-sized town that roams the sea. Her more than 5,000 citizens eat every meal out in any of many mess decks. The constant rotation of breakfast, lunch, dinner, and mid-rats, or midnight rations, keeps galley crews busy night and day.
Hold up on it, okay? When you down to your last 2 pans, and that's when you make more mashed potatoes. Other than that, don't make no more.
As in any town, a carrier's residents can spend months, even years aboard, without seeing her every corner. George Washington is honeycombed with nearly 5 miles of passageways and thousands of watertight doors. Some doors are open only to a select few. Aboard a Nimitz-class carrier, the Combat Direction Center is one of the quietest, most secure locations. Here, science and warfare overlap. In real time, computer and video screens deliver key data from around the world, including battlefields. CDC sailors can see aircraft and other vessels and bring up displays showing their points of view in seconds, discerning friend from foe.
Okay, just give me another call real quick.
Lieutenant Commander John Datka is the officer in charge.
I'm the air defense officer on board the ship, and I'm one of the ship's 4 tactical action officers.
We have various consoles everywhere. The first console you see there is our strike controller. He's going to go out and he's going to be the first person that talks to our aircraft as they take off and go out to do their mission. He's also going to be the first person they talk to when they come back. So if we send out 20 airplanes, we want to make sure we have 20 airplanes coming back and not 21. The center camera is what we call our PLAT, or our precision landing, which helps us see what's going on the flight deck itself. And it gives us overall situational awareness of anything that happens. If there's a major fire or something like that, we'll see that and we'll kind of be able to see outside how things are going, because obviously it stays pretty dark and quiet in here.
Combat Direction's 80 crew members work with deep concentration, analyzing and distributing top-secret information to pilots, and the bridge.
Copy. Have record give me a...
This is one of the Carrier's nerve centers, but a nerve center with mood lighting and an ambience like a reference library.
As things heat up, it becomes very quiet and it's very dark. We usually have the lights all the way down, and our job is to keep the situation calm and controlled and to make sure that we follow the procedures and we go through things by the book. So as things escalate, you would hope, and what we train to, is that the tempo here comes out the exact same.
A Carrier's main shield is her planes, which can bring their armaments to bear on attackers. The second line of defense, batteries of Sea Sparrow missiles. Nimitz-class carriers have 3 Sea Sparrow batteries, 2 aft and 1 forward. Each carries 8 missiles, able to lock onto and bring down a plane or cruise missile within 9 miles of the ship.
When the target gets in close enough, our launcher will slew out to towards the target, and I will fire. I'll push the button here, and I'll fire however many salvos I need to. I can fire 8 missiles in 40 seconds.
If, during an enemy assault, all else fails, the crew can deploy an update of a 19th century weapon, Gatling guns. These 6-barreled radar-controlled arrays are called close-in weapon systems, CWIS for short. Each corner of the ship has a CWIS battery. Cannoneers can focus bursts of 20-millimeter fire at the rate of 3,000 rounds per minute, literally filling a selected patch of sky with metal and high explosive.
CWIS is a close-in weapon system. That's what it stands for. It is our last line of defense. When there is an incoming target, it's coming in and it's going to pick up the closest point of approach. Now, on a missile, it's going to be the front part of it. Well, the idea behind CWIS is to take the warhead out. If you take the warhead out, you don't have to worry about it blowing up. The gun is going to slew back and forth to the closest point, and it's going to start eating it up from the front back. As many rounds as it can. It's going to put as many rounds on that middle target as it can.
The single biggest commodity on board George Washington is JP-5 aviation fuel. The Carrier hauls 2.4 million gallons of the stuff, stored in tanks below the waterline. The highly volatile fuel sees double duty as ballast, literally keeping the Carrier on an even keel. Warplanes can burn 20 gallons of fuel in a single second. So while at sea, carriers like GW must take on jet fuel every few days. To connect with a refueling vessel, sailors shoot lines that they use to pull fuel hoses into place. Buffeted by one another's wakes, the vessels have to keep on course or risk disaster. With so much fuel on hand, fire safety is a primary concern. Throughout the deployment, the Carrier's crew trains to fight fires.
Right now, the firefighting team is getting all the gear they need, getting manned and ready to go ahead up to the space and enter the space to fight the fire.
Let's go! I need some smoke picking up. Let's go! Get up there right now!
Damage control teams drill under conditions as close to the real thing as possible, with artificial smoke billowing and alarms sounding. Because few calamities can play as much havoc with a ship as fire, every single crew member must be certified to fight flames. Exercises like this one keep emergency response skills crisp. George Washington's 6 months on station in the Gulf are nearing their end. another carrier strike group will join the fray.
We've been out here for five and a half months on station every day and turning and heading towards home, while we are going to be so happy to be heading home to see our families.
But even though George Washington is leaving the war zone, pressure remains intense. The call to arms could come anytime, anywhere. So flight training continues unabated. And as the carrier steams west, the crew maintains its physical fitness. Sailors work up a sweat in a makeshift gym with a billion-dollar view. With Norfolk a day sailing away, the air wing takes to the sky, headed for their land base. These aviators will be the first members of George Washington's crew to reunite with their loved ones.
Today is the fly-in. The guys have been gone on a 6-month cruise to the Middle East, and they are coming back. They're flying in today, and we are just so excited to come back.
In an airborne homecoming parade, each squadron passes overhead. These warriors are poised to enter the next phase. New aircraft, new postings, and new challenges to their skill and audacity. But now, it's time for family.
First time you see one of your kids is pretty unforgettable.
It's all about being safe, getting 11 airplanes back from the carrier all safe, all pilots are safe, and now I just need to get my crew back on board. They pull in tomorrow. Once I get them back safe, we'll be good to go.
Naval Station Norfolk is vibrating with the emotional charge that comes when a major warship steams into home port, safe and sound.
Today is special because the George Washington is coming in, and all these sailors are getting off, and they've been out to sea for 6 months.
It's a heartfelt scene, overshadowed by a harsh truth.
Today's kind of a bittersweet. You know, we had such a great deployment, but yet today's special because we get to come home to our loved ones. I get to hug my wife for the first time, but there's a lot of uncertainty about when we're going to go back out to sea.
Beneath the buzz of relief and joy lies the knowledge that at any moment, George Washington and her crew could be summoned back into peril in the air and on the sea.
It's great to be home, but you know, the job isn't done. We're the ready carrier for the next 6 months. We came back from our deployment not ready to quit, but in fact trained up. Our magazines are full, our storerooms are full, our crew is trained, ready to respond to any emergency tasking, that kind of 911 call that our nation could use to get us back into action.
Until that call, or until the next deployment, Nimitz-class carriers stand ready to serve. High-tech bulwarks of American defense.
Next, they had a camaraderie like no other. Hear the stories of America's legendary air squadrons on Birds of a Feather, next on the Military Channel.